times.
Sorry.
That's okay. I've done this a few times, and the first time I gave a little talk at the beginning, and then we launched into what people were wondering about or thinking about. And many of you are repeat attenders. And so I hate to do the same thing over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what I've been thinking about, and then open it up to you guys. And what I've been thinking about doesn't really, whatever, it doesn't have to fuel your questions or your thoughts by any means. And the two things I've been thinking about is that I wanted this to be about after reunion, because we do a lot of work around the search. And we do a lot of work around the reunion, but there's not very much about what happens afterwards. I mean, there are bits and pieces, and thank goodness for Facebook groups, because now you can put stuff out there and begin to get some feedback. But basically, there hasn't been a lot about what happens after reunion. And one of the reasons is when you're searching, you can get search angels and helpers and supporters and, genealogists and people who know how to search, and they can help you. And there's a context for how search happens, and there's support for that. And then your actual reunion, people will give you some ideas about what they did. Oh, we met in a very quiet restaurant with booths, so it would be private, or we did this, we met at a park, or we did that. So you can get some feedback, but then there's a divergent path, because everybody's story is entirely different. And what they find and how they find it and how they negotiate a relationship is entirely different. And it's, there's no sort of one set rule for how this goes. What's a normal after reunion? Who knows? There is no normal after reunion. It is whatever it is. I was thinking today about a 16-year-old that I used to see in therapy a million years ago. I hope she's well. It was fun to think about her. And she searched secretly back in the day, before computers, before Facebook, before Google. She somehow figured out as a 15-year-old how to do this search. And she found her birth mother living in Ohio. She lived in Massachusetts. And she contacted her without telling any adults. And then her parents find out about this, and they were, really upset. And they weren't upset for bad reasons. They were upset that she wouldn't have enough support and was keeping this inside herself. So they came to our clinic. I had a clinic that was expressly for adoption and foster care. And so she came there, and long story short, she met her birth family. She met her birth mother and her siblings, and she decided to move to Ohio to live with them. And her adoptive parents were okay with it after they vetted the whole situation. And they figured, she's going to run away and do this if we don't let her do it. Let's make it contained, and let's do it in a positive way. So she went out and spent, I can't remember exactly, but the better half of a year in Ohio, going to high school and living with her birth parents. And there was no Zoom, there was no anything. I only heard about her through her parents, who every once in a while would call and give me an update. And then she came back to Massachusetts in the summer, and she came to see me weekly. And she said, I don't think I'm going to go back. And I said, well, tell me about this. And she said, it feels like I'm in foster care. And I said, what do you mean? she said, well, I really love getting to know my birth mother and my siblings, but I don't really know them and they have no idea who I am. And I feel like I'm just staying at someone else's house. And, you know, I thought this would fix all my worries, and it doesn't. So we talked about how she could switch things around and spend vacations and summers and learn to be with her family in a different way, but not necessarily to have to live there until she was ready. So anyway, that's just a little story to say that, you know, people have fantasies about what the reunion is going to be like and how they're going to feel and what's going to happen. And life gets in the way. It's not always the way you think it's going to be. So, and not everyone has the same experience by any means. So it's important to be open to differences and to think about them in different ways. And, you know, thinking of that case made me think about the adoptive parents, because, you know, in my clinic, for minors, we always involve the adoptive parents. And even for adults, we sometimes did. Because if it was going to cause anxiety and stress, and if it was going to make things worse, holding up the anxiety for all these adults, then it wasn't going to be good for the adoptee. So we needed to do a lot of sort of, I don't know what it was, psychoeducation with the adoptive parents if they didn't have any background or understanding about what all of this meant. And that was pretty important. With the minors, it's much easier because they get it. If they're going to come and see me and come to my clinic, they've already gotten something or they wouldn't be there. So they come and they know that their child has a need to know more about where they came from. And a lot of these people, 4 families I'm working with right now, had semi-open adoptions. I love in the 80s and 90s, we talked about open adoptions, but open adoption just meant that the parents all met at the birth of the child. It didn't mean that the child met anybody along the way necessarily. And so, you know, it's just really important to help the adoptive parents to understand what's going on. And, you know, for years and years, there are issues about this. I have a couple right now that I see who are in their 70s, and their son, by adoption, has refused to see them. He lives in Boston. They live in Boston. And he said, I will not see you until you go to an adoption competent therapist and until you learn what you didn't know and how it hurt me. And so they came to see me, and, you know, I made reports. He wanted reports from me about how they were doing, what they were understanding, what they weren't understanding. And finally, after 1.5 years of work with them, he and his wife agreed to have dinner with them in a neutral place. But it was, you know, this is something it's pretty important to sort these things out. This wasn't an abusive, I mean, there are many different situations that we could talk about. This wasn't an abusive, well, of course, it was perceived as somewhat emotionally abusive, and it was, but there wasn't anything dramatically wrong with what this family did, especially 70 years ago. They just really didn't understand. They absolutely didn't understand what the impact was for this child of theirs. And even to this day, until we began to discuss it, till I gave them books to read, till we, you know, watched some films together, they really just didn't get it. And you don't get it until you get it. So basically what we're talking about here is what happens after reunion. And as I said, it's not going to be the same for any of you. And you're all going to have different thoughts and feelings about this. How do we do this, Jennifer and Marcy? Did we do, people wrote things, or they just, you know, somehow I forget our protocol for answering questions.
Yeah, your question about relationship with adoptive parents and did you involve them or not involve them was in the registration. But if they want to ask you a question, comment on it, they can raise their virtual hand. They can just simply raise their hand on screen, or they can type it in the chat, and we'll call on them.
Okay, I'm not going to be able to follow the chat very easily, so guide me.
I'll watch it.
All right, thank you.
And Marnie has a question for you.
Okay, hi Marnie. Uh-oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I said happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. I'm ancient.
So my question is along the adoptive parent side. It wasn't until I found a birth parent that I really started to look back at my relationship with my adoptive parents. And after doing a lot of that work and unpacking, I really kind of learned that that relationship was pretty transactional. And I can't really think of a moment growing up where there was empathy or affection. But I, you know, as a lot of adoptees do, you adapt. And, you know, I did the things to get recognized. So I was the overachiever, blah, blah, blah. So fast forward to a couple months ago, and my father's deceased. The mother who raised me, she's very judgmental. And my oldest daughter is gay and getting married and was scared to death, you know, to tell grandma about it. Well, she finally did. And by written correspondence, and the mother who raised me responded with much hate and bad things. And so I haven't spoken to my mother since that's happened, and I don't really feel like I want to. And so I think that you talk about post-reunion, it's like, I think about, well, what would I have been like if I hadn't found birth mother when this all played out, versus now where I've found myself with all the work that I've done. It's like confident in who I am. Like I don't have to chase her anymore. And I'm just kind of curious how other people have, I guess it comes with estrangement. You know, the Adoptees On had that whole series on estrangement. And I'm sure some of you listened to some of those episodes. And so I'm kind of at this crossroads of, do I just not talk to her, or is there a formal process to cut them out, or do we just do what I always did growing up and just not address conflict? So well, I know that's a lot.
Oh, no, it's not a lot. It's like, I think it's many versions of what we all deal with. And I think, you know, what I've learned from the adoptive parents that I've worked with over the last 50 years is that as much as we don't know what it's like to be in a real family, because there's something we don't feel is real about our situation, neither do they. And I think that the judgmental piece, some of it's just character and personality, but some of it's fear of what the neighbors will think, and fear that you've been a bad mother or a bad grandmother, or, you know, all kinds of things. And why that's important, it sounds like you've done incredible work on yourself, Marnie, so this is not for you, but for someone else to know that, you know, this really isn't about you. This is really about them. And the only thing I might recommend for you to do, and I don't think you should, could, or must, or anything of that sort do this, but in relation to your daughter, who's about to have a rite of passage and a joyous occasion, I think you might write some kind of a letter to her saying it's really sad that you couldn't partake of this wonderful family, and that you're missing out on this event, which is, you know, joyous, and we're all looking forward to it. Now, she may have her religious reasons. She's obviously older. She may have a lot of reasons why she, you know, is judgy about this and doesn't get it. But, you know, and I don't think you need to do anything. I think you've done your work and you feel fulfilled with the work you've done. But for your daughter, she wrote this letter to her grandmother, hoping, you know, knowing it would be a little scary, but hoping she'd get a better result. And I think it would mean a lot to your daughter if she knew you stood up for her and wrote something. So that's the only comment I would make. Anybody else have any feelings about this? Jenny? Is that Jenny?
I'm Jenny. Hi, Marnie. I was just curious, do you feel like you are owning your birth mom now? Like you're not, I can't say replacing her, but maybe you feel a closer connection to your birth mom than you did now with this adoptive mom that is in a difficult, judgy situation?
Absolutely. I never really emotionally connected to my adoptive mother, but it didn't take too long to become emotionally connected to my birth mother. You know, that, and one, I went through a phase when we were building our relationship where first year I felt much guilt, you know, of having this affair, of, you know, running around with my birth mother and getting to know her without trying to upset my adoptive mother. But then I learned that I'm allowed to have relationships with both.
No. Well, you know, the other thing is that in terms of looking at things in different ways, there are adoptees who have a really good relationship and a loving relationship with their adoptive mom, and who don't with their birth mom, who feel very emotionally cut off. And I think that's a huge disappointment, because the fantasy is that this will be your real relationship. So it's just, when we talk about post-reunion, it's so different. And it's so important for people to see all the differences. So once again, they don't feel like there's something wrong with them. You know, it's really important, because each situation is dramatically different.
You know, I have thought about, you know, how important it would be to my daughter to stand up for her, but she knows that the relationship with my adoptive mom has been not without challenges for the past 35 years.
Right.
And so we have talked about that, you know, should I get involved or should I not? Because I did send her a letter back when this same daughter was born, because my mother didn't show any interest. And I'm like, are you going to be part of her life or not? And she wrote a nasty letter back to me. So it's like, I don't want to go through that trauma again of
No.
sending another letter and being rejected. But I might write a letter and keep it, you know?
Yeah, you could do that. You know, the thing is that someone like your adoptive mother, I mean, there's a little, and I absolutely do not diagnose people from Zoom, but it sounds like she has some mental health issues. And not only does she have, you know, her disconnect and her disappointment, and did she have any birth children, Marnie?
No.
So she never got to see a child that she would have given birth to. I mean, all of these things are very complicated, and they play out in different ways depending on the people. And it sounds like she is an extremely disappointed woman who at best, and at least, she may have some mental illness that she hasn't attended to.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah. I was in good graces as long as I was in the house, and she had control. But when I left the nest, you know, she lost kind of lost interest, even though, you know, I went on to live a productive life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I think that's, you know, I think you've got it under control. Thank you for telling the story, because I think it illustrated a lot. But I think as far as you're concerned, you're grand.
I think KK had something, wanted to comment on that.
Okay, where are we looking here? Where's KK?
Unmute. Okay, I think I just unmuted, did I?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Oh, good.
Marnie, as a queer person, I would say it sounds like there's been enough attention given to your mother over your entire lifetime and your child's entire lifetime. And as a queer person, I would want you to just show up for me. Be there for me, my wedding.
Yeah.
Just celebrate me and the life that I'm beginning, and screw grandma, because grandma from the beginning, it sounds like when you first had this child, grandma was never terribly grandma-ish.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe it's time to stop hoping grandma will be grandma-ish and just move on, and you take care of your kid and celebrate your kid.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else? Oh, maybe a kitty.
E. Blake, did you have any? Oh, you just had drew a heart up there. I saw something flash on the screen, but if you have anything you want to say, you're welcome to.
Yeah, well, I was on the last time Dr. Joyce was on, and since had a reunion, and I did talk about it for very briefly the last time I was on one of these meetings, but I put it in the chat. But mainly I had a really nice reunion with, there were 4 of us sisters, but the one thing that went wrong was after 3 days, one of the sisters was really upset and moved out of the house we had all rented together. And that just made the whole atmosphere change for the last 2 days. So I wish that it had gone differently, but and we're all older, in the older as 60s to 70. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think, you know, it's hard to know what to do. It sounds like a great idea to rent a place and to all be together and to get to know each other at breakfast, lunch, dinner, hanging out at night. But in some ways, some people really need more space. And it could be that she just needed more space, that it was too intense. Who knows? It's really too bad though, because you had otherwise a really good situation, and that did put a little bit of a pall on it.
Yeah, everybody was sorry that it had happened that way. And it was just some insecurities of the one who moved out, I guess, about wanting to be the favorite. And, you know, it's things you'd go through as a kid, but we were going through them as older people.
What was the place in the family? What was the birth order?
So I'm the oldest, then there are 2 sisters, and it was the youngest of 2 who went to the same adoptive home. And then the youngest one was a new sister to the other 2 sisters. They'd never met. And so the youngest of the 2 wanted to be like best friends with this new baby sister. And it was gonna work out that way, but you know, but it was just a difference in expectations, I think.
Yeah. It's hard to negotiate with so many people who are trying to learn each other. It's just difficult, but it's also hard if you live further away to make sure that you get time together in that way. So it's complicated. You just never know how that's going to go.
It's all resolved now, so it's,
Oh,
you know,
good.
we're all in contact with each other, so
Excellent.
that part is good.
Excellent. That's great. Anybody else? What's going on? What are you thinking about?
I've been in reunion for, my name's Anne, by the way.
Where, oh, there you are. Sorry, it takes me a minute to find people.
And Joyce, I've seen you more than 25 years ago, at least many, many moons ago with AAC. So when I saw your name come back up, I was like, oh my goodness, blast from the past. I have to show up to this. Which at that time, I had not been in reunion, but have been now for 22 years, with 4 other siblings on one side and 5 other on the other, on my birth father's side. And I, first of all, applaud you for saying, you know, all of the energy back then was all about the search. So it wasn't actually about the reunion process. And I think too, I don't know E. Blake's first name, but to her point, I was glad to hear it resolved, because I think us as adoptees always want to be the favorite because it assures our place, you know, that we're all nervous about giving up at some point. Elizabeth, thank you. So everybody wants to be first in line and secure their spot in any relationship, so there's no risk of the relationship breaking, because that's what we all fear anyway. Which is interesting, because in the first couple of years of the reunion, that's what there was a huge fear of, was that, you know, what could potentially happen that would tear apart this, what felt like a fairy tale reunion. And my entire family welcomed me. There were 5 generations of people. So I got a 5-generation photograph. And it just seemed like, you know, you're on cloud 9 through this reunion. But since that time, you know, lots of things have happened. But the one thing I'll say that I thought was super helpful, and I'm hoping this is true for Elizabeth and also for Marnie, is that the one thing we did do very early on in the reunion, which I thought was pretty miraculous, was we agreed to make a commitment to be honest with each other, to honor each other's place, to be respectful of either needing, you know, time or space or support. But basically that we prioritize the relationship in the reunion first. And then it was like whatever we could do outside of that, you know, whether we do things together or whether we don't. And there were fortunately lots of guidance along the way, but I thought it was unique in that quality, and maybe other people do that as well. But it continues to be a little bit fairy tale-ish after 22 years now. And we just took this really great trip together where we went kayaking and hiking with our husbands together. And it was just the 4 of us, which was super neat. Where, you know, maybe physically she couldn't do as much, but, you know, we met up later or something like that. But I thought it was unique in that way. And so I guess if there was one thing I could add, it would be that I think when you're able to do that, like any relationship, any friendship, any, you know, spousal relationship, that when you make that commitment to guard or protect the relationship first, you sort of can figure out all the details afterwards. So for what that's worth, you know.
I think that's great, Anne. And you know, a lot of people recommend something like that. And it sounds like you guys were able to follow through in a very important way. I think a lot of people have trouble following through. And the first piece that's difficult is the honest. Adoptees learn to be dishonest. They learn to please other people and not to be honest with themselves. And so sometimes it's very hard, in fear of losing a connection, to say what you really feel. One of the things I used to tell clients before they had a reunion was, I hope this is wonderful, and, I can't wait to hear how it goes. But I want you to know that the most important thing is your first fight. Because if you have a first fight and you can work it through and get to the next place, that's great. There are a lot of people who have a fight that may not even be overt, and they end up cutting each other off, or one cuts the other off. And, people feel very hurt that they've been rejected. And, there's so many pitfalls to being adopted and being in any relationship. So when you get a relationship that's this important, it's a little scary to be as honest as you want to be. So congratulations, Anne. I'm so glad. 22 years it's not like this happened last week.
Right. And we did have that big first fight. And the big first fight was about, because there were so many generations alive. And it was about what it was like in the room. Every time I would be in the room with her and her mom, because you can imagine how much unresolved affect was in the room. Yeah. With the three of us in a room. And I literally would get a migraine every single time the three of us would be in the same room. And so we had this huge it was just a huge fight. Because every time we'd be in the room, she would make it about her. My birth mom would. Yeah. And I basically, very crucially, she was like, what about my grief? And what about my pain? And what about, and if you hear the story from my grandmother was married to a POW who was a raging alcoholic, who couldn't hold a job, who couldn't get out of his own way. And she was holding down 2 jobs with 3 kids. And she was very clear. My birth mother was being promiscuous. And she said, you're not bringing this baby into this house if you get caught. And so that's exactly what happened. And she felt disregarded in all of this. Her mom was just actually quite clear about that would be the breaking point for her, because she was living with this very brutalized man who came back. If you've ever seen Unbroken, that's about what the story was for him. And we went back to where we were staying. We were both staying with my cousin. I said, you're really making me very upset. I said, I'm actually really angry with you. And she's like, why? I said, because every time you talk to her, you make it about you. I said, I hate to break it to you. It was never about you. That decision was about me. And I said, for the record, it was the right decision. It didn't come without consequences, but there's no way you're going to make me stand here and apologize for what I benefited from. Now I lost too, but I benefited, and here we are, and we know each other. But every time you're in the room with her, you make it about you. And I was basically like, knock it off.
That's good. I mean, you stood up to her in a way that I imagine she didn't stand up to her mother. I mean, I bet she yelled at her mother. I bet she said awful things as a young woman in that situation. But I doubt that she had a rational conversation and stood up to her mother.
Well, I pointed out to her, I was like, you were the one that had sex. You were the one that got pregnant. I said, and by the way, you're the one that signed the papers. I said, no, I realize it was under duress. You didn't want to. But what choices did you have? Where were you going to go? You didn't have a lot. You did your best you could.
And you know, Anne, the thing is that she may not have had enough of a response to support her viewpoint of this. I mean, some of her viewpoint, if you take you and her mother out of it, is very true and real.
Oh, sure it is.
Yeah. So you see, the more we talk about after reunion, the more we see that this doesn't get easier. It's a relationship. And you know, one of the things I always say is, just because you're related, and those of us who are adopted and who've never known a relative until we had a child or until we found our birth family, think that being related is everything. And it is pretty much a lot. But the thing is, just because you're related, it doesn't mean you have a relationship. And basically, you're a stranger until you're not. And, you know, so I think the guidelines that you set in the beginning of your reunion were very important in terms of building a real relationship, because there's a fantasy that there's already a relationship, and there really isn't yet. It takes work. It takes time. It takes a lot to build a relationship. So I want to make sure, I'm seeing the time, so I want to make sure we get to anyone else who has a comment or a question.
Yeah, Joyce, Tina has something in the chat. She wanted to know if you could talk about some helpful language coming from an adoptee that would express, it can be overwhelming and I need time, without giving the impression that you're not interested.
And then Julie next. I think Judy had her hand up.
Is that the same question or no? Oh, okay. So you'll be next, Judy. I think, Tina, that the language, I mean, I wouldn't just make up some language in general. I'd want to know more about your specific situation and how it's going to be best crafted as a language. But generally speaking, I think it's just fine. If someone can't understand that you need some space, that this is intense, and that you need to think about this. I always tell adoptive parents with little kids and birth parents, when a small child, 5 or 6 years old, asks their adoptive mother a very scary question about adoption, or is meeting their birth mother and wants to know something about, well, who was my birth father? I think it's perfectly all right for the adults to say, you know what? I will always tell you the truth and I will always answer your questions, but sometimes I can't answer them when you ask me. I need to think about it for a while. And I think the same goes the other way, that sometimes when someone asks you something, you need some space and time to consider it before you respond. And I think that's fair. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I think at the beginning, I felt the responsibility of needing to answer everything that was asked of me. So that puts it in perspective because I'm coming in from a more emotional space. So for you to say, I can take time and I don't have to answer right away, or I don't have to be there physically when I'm asked to be there. So, so yes, thank you.
I do think that saying, I will always answer your questions. I mean, you know, but I can't always answer them in the moment that you ask. Sometimes I need to process. Sometimes yes. I need space.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Judy.
Hi, it's been wonderful just listening. And I just actually located my birth father. I had been in reunion with my birth mother and she passed away a couple years ago.
Sorry.
And thank you. And my birth father never knew about me. And his son, my brother, my bio brother, actually located me on 23andMe and opened up this relationship. So in the last few months, you know, I ended up with a father, a brother, a sister, And my son was getting married. So my father actually wanted to come and meet my entire family. So it was really actually shocking and kind of like a fairy tale experience. And my brother came. So in the middle of all of this, there's the sister, and apparently there's just some rough edges in the family between the sister and their brother. So when my brother arrived at the wedding, he informed me that she was very upset because I didn't invite her to the wedding. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of family stuff that I don't even, anyway, she and I had not really connected yet. I had with my brother and father, and, you know, I had just gotten an email from her. So anyway, I just talked to my dad again yesterday, and the brother and the sister have had kind of this long going feud, but it was so awkward. I felt like, well, basically she was angry because brother had come to my son's wedding, but he doesn't go visit her. So anyway, it was quite awkward. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. I'm not quite sure how to manage that, but it's been a month since the wedding, and I'm thinking of reaching out to her and trying to make some connection. You know, I've never heard from her. So.
Well, you know, I'm thinking that you didn't really invite them to the wedding. They invited themselves.
In a way, my brother, well, my brother and I had been talking. He had already come to visit me. He flew here and he met me, and he met my son who was going to get married. So we actually did invite him. And then I asked him, do you think your dad would like to come? And he said, yeah. So I called him and he did. So it was a mutual invitation and a mutual desire, you know, to be there. And it was wonderful. It was just really lovely.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think that your sister's very jealous. I think she was the only sister, and now there's a better one. And because everyone likes the one they don't have history with. So,
Okay.
so anyway, I think she's just having a really hard time being replaced. And you would be in the same position if it were the other way. We all would. So I think the thing to do is to tell her that you're just, you know, galloping along. You have no idea what you're doing. You're trying to meet these people who are also your family. You'd love to meet her. You didn't mean any harm. You know, it was your son's wedding and you didn't know what to do. What if there were 90 people in that family? Are you going to meet them and a year later invite everybody to the wedding? I don't think so. So I think it's, you know, she's just jealous. She just, and it's fine. It's a reasonable and normal reaction to feeling left out, to feeling replaced. And I think you just need to be kind and explain to her that in retrospect, you understand and you apologize, you know?
That sounds good. I hadn't really gotten around to it because I have some messiness that has nothing to do with them at all. But I am, you know, when I talked to him yesterday, my dad, he told me that my brother and sister had actually met out of state for a funeral, and they were having what he called a serious conversation. So, you know, it's probably, so, you know, it's probably a good time to touch base and try to connect. So thank you. That's good advice.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, Joyce, we have KK who's been waiting, and then time permitting, I have a question in the chat I'm going to read to you, and then Jenny Pinter has a question.
Okay.
So go ahead, KK.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Joyce, I have been sort of in reunion with a birth mother since April. She's 92 years old. I wrote her and she wrote me back a beautiful letter enclosing 90 years worth of family photos,
Wow.
a medical history that goes back to her parents' generation,
Wow.
and indicated she wanted more contact, that there would be more, and expressed love for me. And I wrote her back. I made her a special photo album that I FedExed to her from my home in Mexico to the US where she is. And there's been no answer, no response. And then I wrote again last month and there's been no response.
Do you know if she's all right?
I do believe she's all right. I'm in touch with a half brother who is estranged from her and has been for 30 years, but he would know if she was no longer all right.
And does she live alone, KK?
She lives with her other daughter, her youngest daughter, who has never married, never moved away from home, is mom's life partner. And the brother and several other people I've talked to think that the sister's making my mail disappear.
I bet so.
Yeah.
It's another case of jealousy.
Yeah.
Why did she send you all the pictures and all the story and she didn't, I think that just as with Judy, it's important for you to be in touch with her and to tell her you understand this is hard. She's the one doing all the work. She's the one there taking care of her mom. And, but really it must be a relief for her mother to be able to talk about what happened all those years ago when she had a baby that she couldn't raise. And, try to get the sister to understand from the mother's point of view how important this is, that there's a healing of her heart that's taking place by having some contact with you.
Okay, so I can write to the sister. I'm
Yeah.
also thinking about having a welfare check done by the police when I'm there in October, when I'm visiting New York in October, because my birth mother did write to the son she's been estranged from for 30 years, who I'm in contact with and going to be meeting and have gotten friendly with. She did write to him that she wants to have the daughter removed as her power of attorney because she believes her assets are being misused. So, I'm also concerned about her welfare, and her son doesn't want to get involved. He is not going to get involved. He's ignoring the fact that his mother sent him this letter.
I don't think you should get involved in that aspect of it either.
No.
No, I think you should definitely do a wellness check if you're very worried. Between now and then, you're going to write to the sister and see if she comes through. But I think the part about money and property and possessions is a terrible, terrible problem in any family. And if this sister has been the guardian and taking care of this mother all along, and that's how she can feel appreciated. And, you don't know if your birth mother is, if she has a bit of dementia.
He does not.
Okay.
The 8-page handwritten,
Yeah.
double-sided letter she wrote that
Yeah.
gives 90 years of history and
Amazing.
goes into every memory she has of my birth.
But see, KK, you don't know if she's on some meds or whatever that are making her a little, paranoid. I mean, that's,
That's true.
So I think you do need to A, get in touch with the sister, B, when you're there, do a wellness check. I believe all of that, but I wouldn't do too much looking into her property or money because it ends up just looking like you're after it.
Yeah. No, that was just a reason to do the welfare check.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get involved in that at all.
Yeah.
There's another brother who died last year, and they're all battling over what he left without a will. And maybe the sister's worried that I want a piece of that. And I mean, I
You can tell the sister.
don't need their money.
you can tell the sister that you have absolutely no legal right to any of that because
Which is
you're
true.
not legally, yes. And if anyone wants to name you in their will, they can, but you don't automatically have any right to any of that money because you're legally not connected to them. You're genetically connected to them, which is a ridiculous pain in the ass, but that's the reality.
Would it be reasonable to say in the letter to her that, you know, I don't want to get involved in the family money situation?
I wouldn't say that. What I'd say is, from my understanding and all the reading I've done over the years, many people are afraid to have a relationship with an adoptee because they think they're after something.
Mhm.
I'd make it very general. And I'd say, you know, I'm fine. I have a lovely home. I'm very happy. I don't need millions of dollars or houses in, you know, the Hamptons. I'm completely fine. And I'm not looking for anything but information about my past and a connection to people I'm related to.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to say anything else. I don't think it's good for you to say you know anything about the brother's intestate will, or, I mean, because you know that from the evil brother to her. So
Yeah.
I think it's better to just stay naive.
Okay. Okay.
This
Thank you.
woman's-
I will write to this. I hadn't thought about writing to the sister. I just thought about doing the kindest welfare check.
Yeah. Well, I think you can do that too, but I think you may have better information after writing to the sister. If you calm her down and she gets it that you're not after anything, that you just want information, and you know, I think that's the best.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, was there one other?
Yes, Zoom user asked if one can hire a reunion mediator. Now, we do have Darren in the room, so that would be a good one to reach out, but I just wanted to see what other answers you had as well on that, Joyce.
Well, I think any adoption competent therapist, and Darren does this, so yes. You know, what you want is someone who's adoption competent, who has some experience, who didn't just put their shingle out a week ago. I mean, you want someone who knows what goes on. These are, like I said, these are all very different stories. So just because you've seen, it used to drive me nuts when people would say they were adoption competent and they weren't. And you'd ask them, what makes you adoption competent? And they'd say, oh, because I've seen 2 adopted families and I've seen an adult adoptee. That doesn't make you adoption competent. So interview people really well and find out, you know, what their experience is and what they're going to do, because you need to be in charge of your search and reunion and your post reunion. There are some people who just take it over, and really that's not in your best interest. Your pacing is your pacing, and you may be very interested in getting going, but then once you've learned some things, you may need 6 months to process it. And if your person you're working with is pushing ahead, that's not good for you. So just stay in charge of your own life. You've lost a lot of that opportunity just by being an adoptee. Don't let it happen during this period. Make sure that you're the driver of your car.
Okay. And then Jenny had her hand up, I believe.
Where'd Jenny go?
Yeah, I'm up here. Howdy.
Ah, there you are.
I just wanted to ask real quick. So I'm in a position where I've met my birth mom, and I'm just getting the opportunity. I met her about 2.5 years ago. I'm getting a chance in the next month or two to meet her sister, who is my aunt. And then I've also been like so pants on fire to get any information about her parents, her grandparent, my grandparents. They've passed away, but I'm still very connected and wanting stories and photos and interests. But my birth mom has done no work, and didn't really ever want to be found. And so she has no way to understand my side of it because she's not even working on hers. But I don't know how to verbalize why this is important to me. And it makes me kind of think, well, am I just crazy? Why do I need something out of people that are no longer able to be met? So I just need some encouragement or some words, I guess.
Not at all crazy. You're like ultra normal. What happens if you find your birth parents and they're deceased? You don't just stop your search because you have other relatives. And sometimes the stories you hear from other people fill in a lot of the blanks more than the person themselves would have, which is true in this case. I think what you say to your aunt, and you say whatever you want to say, but something like this. You say, I understand the pain and difficulty that my birth mother has with this. And I understand that there may have been complicated issues in the family because she had a child. But I'm hoping that you can help me to understand more about the family. I want to know stories. I want to know where people came from. I want to know some medical history, but really the stories are what I want. I want to know, that my grandfather came from Lithuania and that he was a farmer. I want to know that, these are the stories that other people have and you don't have those.
And it was no big deal. Maybe they wanted them or they didn't, but I never had a choice to. So in the case of me, my birth mom and her sister hid the fact that I ever existed. My grandparents never knew who I was, but I have similarities to my grandfather and my grandmother in certain ways. So, and my aunt, her sister, doesn't know who my father is, but I know, and my birth mom knows. So there's some landmines in there too.
Yeah. Just gingerly go about it. But your point is a really, you have every right to know your story. And this is an extension of your story.
It is, yeah.
And you can ask anything. She doesn't have to answer. This is the thing about reunion. You can ask anyone anything, but they can choose whether to tell you or not. You can want a relationship with someone, but they can choose to have a relationship or not. So, but you need to take that step because you want that information. You want those stories.
I just do. Yeah, I just do. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Joyce and I were discussing the schedule. The 2 weeks from now would be the 7th of September, which is the day after Labor Day, and it's also the week of our conference. So she's going to consult her calendar and follow up with us and let us know what's going to work best for her. But we will be back, and if you're able to join us, I'm dropping the information in the chat now at our virtual conference. We've got a lot of great presenters, including Dr. Joyce, who will be doing a lunchtime presentation for us. You can join virtually, you can watch live at that time, or it has a 6-month replay on it. So if anybody's interested, we'd love to have you join us. And thank you again, Joyce. We appreciate your time and your wisdom and are just so grateful that you're able to do this for us.
You're welcome. I always enjoy it, and there are always wonderful contributions. So thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.